So I really did not take a very deliberate route to being a scientist. Like many of you all, I'm sure, I was told that I was good at science when I was young. And so I became a biology major when I was in college. And I graduated from college without having any idea about what I wanted to do. So I went off to find a job, and my first job was as a venipuncturist, drawing blood in a hospital. I did that for about 6 months. I was a very good venipuncturist, incidentally. And then I moved into working in a clinical hematology lab. And while I was there, I started missing school. And so I took a graduate course in cell and molecular biology. And during that course, I met another graduate student whose lab had an opening for a technician. And so I started working for Oscar Miller, who had just recently been named to the National Academy of Sciences, and worked in his lab for 3 years doing electron microscopy, looking at chromatin and transcription through the electron microscope. This was a technique that he had developed. And that's what really got me excited about science. So I proceeded to apply to graduate school, and I came to graduate school. I was a postdoc and then got my first position as a faculty member. But in each case, each sort of step arose as I was going through the last one, because I got very excited about what I was doing. So I think that's very different from many other people who I know think that this is what they might want to do right from the beginning. And for me, it was not, but it was the best choice I could have made in the end for me. So I think being a technician in the lab before going to graduate school is a great thing. Mm-hmm. I interview many students as they're thinking about going to graduate school. And I think some people get concerned because they've taken off too much time. And I have to say that very first test that I ever took after I had been out of college for a while, I was a nervous wreck, because I had forgotten how to study, or I thought I had forgotten how to study, and I looked at the questions and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't answer a single thing. And then I settled down and it was fine. But it's scary. On the other hand, I think my experience as a technician in a research lab with graduate students and postdocs was incredibly valuable for my progress through graduate school, because it enabled me to really think about what a good project was, what a good mentor would be like. I had those tools and skills before I started graduate school. Now, that being said, I completely pivoted in terms of the research that I was doing. And so I did have a lot of insecurities about failing at the bench, not knowing how to do things, having people expecting that I would be able to know how to do things and that I didn't. But I overcame those insecurities eventually. And so it was all good. I think taking time off for people who aren't sure about what they want to do is the best thing you could possibly do. And it was really a great choice for me. Yeah, and I was out of school for 5 years, which was really quite some time. I was probably ready to go to graduate school a few years early, but at that point, my husband was in law school. We were very poor, and so it just took a couple more years. Now, I will say, as a technician, I was lucky to be in an environment where I could take classes. So I took a class every single year, every single semester, and I took that class with other graduate students. Mm-hmm. So that was a great practice for me. It got me comfortable about graduate school. It showed me that I could succeed in the classwork at least. So that was all really good. But there are different kinds of pressures. I mean, everybody has different pressures. For somebody who's taken that much time off, the pressure is pretty extreme because I think people think that you will know more than you do because you have a lot of experience in lab. And while I did in electron microscopy, I did not in molecular biology. I did not in many other areas that I ended up using. And so I really worried when I did my first rotation. In fact, you'll laugh at this. I went through the interview process and talked to many, many different faculty members during my interview, and really got excited about one of the faculty members with whom I interviewed. And so I decided not to rotate in his lab because I thought, not first, because I wanted to learn techniques and be an idiot first in somebody else's lab before I went into the lab that I was sure I was going to go into. So I proceeded to rotate in another lab, and that project went super, super well. And it was very exciting. Then I went to the next lab, which is the lab I thought I was going to love. I loved that too, and I was just distraught about where I was going to do my research. And I decided on the first lab because I just thought I would be able to learn more skills as a graduate student in that lab. And it turns out I went and did my postdoc with the other lab, and so I had the best of both worlds.
Wow.
And so that's a great question. I think I'm a little biased because I have had a wonderful, wonderful career as a woman scientist. And I really believe in my case that being a woman has not impacted either negatively or positively my career very much. I've been incredibly fortunate to be in a department where there are a lot of women scientists, a lot of women faculty, and a lot of senior women faculty at first. And so they were groundbreakers. So any of the sort of issues you hear about real challenges in terms of being a woman, that had already been sort of taken care of. And the women who had been in the department were highly respected as scientists and as colleagues before I got here. They also served as great mentors for me. And I think that that was really important because one of the messages I want to give to all of you is finding a lot of mentors and good mentors is a critical part to you being able to succeed in whatever career you choose. And I had that opportunity. So I could learn from the things that had happened to them. And if there's one thing I learned, it's really that not to make sort of being a woman be an excuse for not being able to be successful. There are certain traits that we have, there are certain conditions that we have, there are certain people who are going to think less than you, you're going to be in rooms sometimes where your opinion is not quite as valued. But that should not be an excuse to your ability to succeed, and it should not make you angry other than that it makes you determined that your voice will be able to be heard. And that when you get into positions of leadership, you make sure that number one doesn't happen to others, and number two, that you're there to serve and help younger women faculty or men faculty as they go through the same process. So I feel really fortunate. I know there are others who are not nearly as fortunate as me. I've mentored a lot of those women faculty who are in much less inviting departments than mine. And what I respect about those women is that they reach out to me actually frequently, and they do reach out to other people so that they can get help in navigating their own issues. And that's critical for any woman, man, anybody who's navigating and moving up in their career, is to find people who can really help them. I mean, you all think of mentors as students, but we all have mentors. As old as I am, I still have mentors, younger people, older people, who just have different experiences and who can help me if I hit a roadblock or something that is difficult, or just somebody who I want to talk things through. And having many mentors is really important because you need different types of input. You don't just need the scientific input from your PI. You might need input on some professional something or some personal something. And building this network, as you said, is critical and important. And I think what I really respect of your generation is you go out and get that much more than my generation did. I've had many students come to me and say, I would like to use you as a mentor if you could help me talk, when I need help in how to deal with my mentor, or whatever it is that they need. They actually come to me and ask me to help. I've had one woman graduate student who wanted to really talk with me once a month to just make sure that she was progressing in the way that she should. And she would ask me questions like, in your experience, what makes a good graduate student? What types of traits are really important for a graduate student to have a good graduate career? And we would have those kinds of conversations, but they helped her because then she would sort of synthesize that and come back to me and say, you said this. I think I'm not doing that very well. How can I get help? And I really respect, I think your generation is so much better than mine in terms of reaching out for that kind of, and developing that kind of network. I heartily encourage you to do that. So yes, it's difficult to manage both. I have 3 adult sons, older than you all now. It's really sad. They are wonderful, wonderful adults. They weren't always such great teenagers at all. And it was wild. I mean, I will say that managing and navigating a personal life, a professional life, whatever you have in your personal life and your professional life is not easy. Is it worthwhile? Absolutely. Is it fun? A lot of the times, but it was for me, it was crazy. So I have a husband who is also a professional, not a scientist, but we had busy careers. And so it was sort of all hands on deck when our children were young. We, would get home and they'd be home and we'd be cooking and bathing and homeworking and blah, blah, blah until we got them to bed. And one of the really positive things about an academic career that nobody ever talks about is the flexibility of time. Because that once they got to bed, I was able to get back to work. And so I didn't sleep. I was very sleep deprived for probably 20 years. I'm still a horrible sleeper, actually, and it all started then. But that was really a good thing. The second thing is recognizing that, you can do a lot, but you can't have everything perfect. And so we did not have a perfect yard. We did not have a perfect house. We didn't travel a whole lot other than to see family for a while. We made choices. You will make other choices, but the bottom line is you can't do every single thing that you want to do. And so you have to balance, and you have to do teamwork if you're fortunate enough to have a partner who can do that. And you have to sort of make decisions about what's important to you. And then run with it and try to enjoy the time because it's stressful, but it can be really fun. So I met this woman one time. She was giving a seminar and she was about my age, very accomplished scientist. And it was so interesting because she and I had completely, we were the same age, completely divergent career decisions all along. So she had done her graduate work and her postdoc in very, very famous people's labs, very high power, very, very, accomplished. And her postdoctoral mentor said, don't have children until after you get tenure, don't do this, don't do this. And so she worked her way up the tenure route. And at some point she had one child because her husband, I don't know that she was so interested in having children, but her husband really wanted. And her husband was a stay-at-home dad. And she continued along this, incredibly productive sort of trajectory. And I did everything wrong. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I actually did my graduate work and my postdoctoral work and my faculty position the entire time here at the University of Virginia, where everybody says you can't do that and succeed. And, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I had my first child during my second year of graduate school. I was exceedingly pregnant in my fourth year of graduate school when I defended. And I had my third child when I was a postdoctoral fellow. Nobody would tell you those are the right times to do things. And, but what was interesting is I had this conversation with her and I thought, she's marginally more famous than I am. but probably my footprint here at UVA might be even a little bit, stronger than her footprint at her institution, because that's where I spent my time. I didn't spend a lot of time traveling and going to meetings when I was younger, because I couldn't see leaving my poor husband alone with 3 wild boys, and it was just a horrible thing. So I didn't travel for research for my science very much at that time. But we all make different decisions, and you just have to feel comfortable in your decision. When it's not a good one, you're willing to sort of change direction and give yourself a break, because it is impossible to do everything well. In fact, I guarantee you that you won't do everything well. I certainly didn't parent perfectly. I didn't do mentor perfectly. But you've got to give yourself a break, because sometimes doing it as well as you can is good enough. Most of the time, that's the case. And the other thing that's important is sometimes you're competing against people who have more time. So when I was a postdoc, I had 3 little kids at one point. And this was hard to get over myself, because what happened is I was in a lab where a really exciting discovery had happened. And I was part of that discovery, but I was a little bit on the periphery because I had other responsibilities. And 2 of the other postdocs, really did work 24/7 for a period of time there. And I had to sort of talk myself down to the fact that, okay, I made other decisions that were different from them, and it's okay, because I was being pulled by the science. And I was a little bit sort of both embarrassed that I couldn't quite commit the same amount of time, and maybe even horribly jealous because they were, making these discoveries that I was only on the periphery of. And I just had to sort of calm myself down and say, look, I made certain decisions, they've made certain decisions, it's all good. But it's hard sometimes, because you do get pulled into wanting and wanting and wanting, and you can't have it all. So this is really where I'd say give yourself a break, give myself a break. It is hard. We do have really high expectations for ourselves. I think that's part of the skill set that we attract or we think about when we're interested in science is we're perfectionists. We expect to do well. We expect that the more work you put in, the more you're going to get out. And those are impossible things to achieve. And just giving yourself a break is really important. And then the second thing I'd say is try to have fun when you're doing it. I find that is another thing I find about your generation is everybody's trying so hard to figure it out that you're not relaxing enough to enjoy where you are at the time. And, that's a really critical thing to do. As crazy as my life was for a while, and I really thought I was going to be this wonderful role model for women scientists, incidentally. And the first 5 graduate students I had were all women. And I thought, oh, this is great. And 4 out of 5 of them decided that they didn't want to go into academic careers because they didn't want to be as crazy as I was. And I thought, oh, I'm not being a very good role model here. But, it's okay. Everything is, it doesn't matter. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. But it's still fun. And you should still, if you're not satisfied, then I would say reevaluate and think about what else. The best thing about getting the degree that you're getting is that you have the opportunity to use it in so many different ways. And even if you have a favorite way, and I definitely believe this, if it doesn't work out, then be open to other directions, whether it doesn't work out because you don't get tenure, whether it doesn't work out because you're not happy, because you're not being fulfilled. You have so many opportunities now as a consequence of the training that you're getting, and it's such valuable training that, be open to evaluating and trying to change things if you can. And a lot of things are outside of your control. That's the other thing that is, I'm a bit of a control freak, I will say. And, even things in the academic world like getting tenure, I was panicked that I wouldn't get tenure. And then I sort of said, look, I'm going to do the best I can. And I don't want to not get tenure in the end because I didn't do X, Y, or Z. But if I didn't get tenure after I gave it my best shot, I felt that I'd be able to find something else to do that would satisfy me. And that's what I mean by giving yourself a break. The things that aren't in your control, and the things that are in your control, you just give the best you can and try to enjoy the ride while you're going through it. So I think that's a great, great question. And I guess I would say a few things. I'm going to sort of say some for the academic and some for just basic research in whatever venue. One is I think it's important to have greater flexibility for non-traditional trajectories. So, a man can clearly be as active of a parent as a woman, but the actual, giving birth, etc., takes a lot out of you physically and timing. And I think it is really important to recognize that for women and to be able to say, there are differences, there are physical differences, and be they that you're having children, be they that you have an elderly parent who you need to care for, whatever it is, I think this sort of pigeonholing everybody into the same exact trajectory is really a problem. And I think we have to be more open to recognize that everybody's not going to fit into that there are going to be circumstances that are going to make it so that they're not. And I would say this is true for men and women. It just sort of depends on what they are. In the academics, there's a pretty fixed window of getting tenure, for example. You can get a year off the clock if you happen to get pregnant or you happen to have an elderly mother or something, but that's 1 year off the clock. And that might not be what you need, if you happen to have a reason that you need to do something for many years, how do you get back into this? So I think the second thing is, how can we develop some sort of paths that allow us to tread water for a while? Science is hard because it's constantly moving, and if you're not on that track, right, you feel like you're falling off. But I would argue that if we can keep up a little bit in terms of what's happening with, reading, and are there ways that we can sort of manage so that we can tread water during a period of 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years, and then get back into it and start ramping up again? And this is actually what I did as a postdoc. Is I worked part-time for a while, and what did it do? It allowed me to tread water. I wasn't making the progress that some of my colleagues in my lab were doing, and that's why I had to sort of hold myself back about that. But my choice was, I had 3 little kids at that point, and it was just a zoo, and so I worked 3 days a week in the lab. And that allowed me to only tread water. I wasn't making the progress I wanted, but I got some publications. I was able to read up. I was following everybody else's work. So I was treading water. And then that enabled me, when I was in a position to be able to get back into it, to get back into it. Whereas if I had stopped, I never would have been able. If I had taken off 2 or 3 years, it would have been so much harder. So I wish there were ways, more flexibility, and more people who are willing to have somebody sit in your lab for 2 or 3 days a week and have that be something that they're willing to support. And I think that would help. The other thing I really want to stress is that the benefits of our careers in medicine and research are not highlighted enough. You hear and you see crazy faculty who have trouble getting grants, and it's so stressful. People in medicine who are just getting bogged down with, the challenges of modern medicine. But I think you as young people rarely hear, what are the great benefits? So I already mentioned one, the flexibility of an academic career is an incredible advantage. I got to my kids' sporting events, not all of them, but some of them. When somebody was sick, I could stay home and go in late or work. There is an incredible amount of flexibility, and there are few other types of professions where you have that amount of flexibility. It doesn't mean you're not working hard, you're working your tail off, but you do it in the hours that you have available. And I think that's often not really communicated so well. In medicine, I think that more and more people are now sort of sharing jobs, and that's another great sort of opportunity and benefit to that. It's not so easy to do as a researcher, right? Because two people aren't able to do the same project so easily. But in medicine, I know a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, who basically share a job, and it works out really great. So there are benefits, and I think what happens is the realities get so bogged down for many of us that we fail to discuss and encourage people to understand the benefits. And I think if we could do that better, I think that there would be a greater chance for our younger scientists to start thinking about ways to mold careers that would work for them, and recognize that there are some really great benefits to this job, as well as some of the things that really can bring us down.